Ocarina of Time's release in 1998 marked Nintendo's first step into seriously world-building Hyrule. The release of Majora's Mask and subsequently Wind Waker inadvertently sparked one of the most interesting parts of Hyrulean world-building, the timeline. In 2002, the concept of the timeline was first introduced to the most enthusiastic fans. Nobody knew for sure what this timeline would look like following the Wind Waker, but message boards were already discussing the potential ramifications of these stories all being linked somehow. None of this was confirmed until 2007, when a producer at Nintendo, Mr. Aonuma. Anyway, he confirmed the existence of not just one timeline, but two branching timelines, with the first branch starting in Ocarina of Time. Now, this news sparked tons of new discussions, none of which really gained any official credence until 2011, when Nintendo released the first official Zelda timeline for the 25th anniversary. Came in a little book, and it had a little map here. Pretty interesting. So this new document, this would remain the official Zelda timeline all the way until December of 2017. This was when Breath of the Wild came out. Now, with the release of Breath of the Wild, we actually got a whole new timeline, and a lot of other changes that came with that timeline that we'll get to in a minute. So, Nintendo releases Breath of the Wild, and they do something subtle, but very interesting. Looking back, I think we finally started to understand just how big of a deal these changes were, but in the moment, it really didn't feel like all that much. Now, these changes that Nintendo made are what's called a retcon, and this is what we're going to be talking about for the rest of the video. So, world building is necessary. It just is. Good games naturally have worlds that are engaging, exotic, and most importantly, believable. Creating a cohesive story isn't as easy as it seems, though, especially when you have different developers all responsible for the same story across literal decades of time. So, what do you do when you want to change something that someone else set in stone 30 years prior? You do what's called a retcon. So, retcons are some of the most interesting parts of video game storytelling, especially since most of the time, developers that do make a retcon don't go out and tell you, hey, we're changing this part of it, and I know that we said something different before, but this is what's happening now. No, they do it. And that's kind of cool. It's almost like real life in a sense. Let me explain. Have you ever had your parents tell you a story about when they were kids, and then you had your grandparents tell you that same story and it's like way different? In real life, we wouldn't call the differences retcons. They're just the way different participants remember different parts of the story. Now, retcons can sometimes feel like that, and when they do, they're done right. Retcons aren't always done right, however. Sometimes retcons can feel like the developers shoving a dirty skeleton of a bad storyline that they don't want to remember into a closet. One such retcon is the differences between Samus Aran and Metroid Other M and Metroid Dread.
So why did you shoot me?
You can't destroy these Metroids.
What?
Nobody wanted our stoic hero to come across like such a weak, cooperative, rank-and-file soldier. Nintendo realized this, and they gave us Metroid Dread, where Samus says a single line of dialogue in a language that we can't even understand. I like Metroid Dread. However, this did feel like Nintendo shamefully walking away from a character development that they wished that they could just forget. Retcons also happen when developers remake an older game. Star Fox 64 is a remake of Star Fox from the SNES. Star Fox Zero is a remake of Star Fox 64. All of these storylines are the same conquering of Andros in a sense, but all are told in wildly different ways, with characters behaving differently and with different attitudes and different relationships to one another. This is fine too, this works. But the worst retcons are the ones where the developers clearly have no respect for previous titles and just see the IP as a vessel to impose their story upon. Sonic the Hedgehog is a prime example of this, maybe the prime example of this. Now, in the earliest incarnations of Knuckles, he's Sonic's number 2 adversary, right behind the big bad Eggman. He's constantly trying to get in his way and a strong force to be reckoned with. Unless you're playing Sonic and Knuckles, where he's an ally, or in Sonic Heroes, where he's one of your best friends. Likewise, in the earliest adaptations of Shadow the Hedgehog, he's Sonic's number 2 adversary, right behind the big bad Robotnik, constantly getting in his way and a strong force to be reckoned with. Unless you're playing Sonic Adventure 2, where he's one of your closest allies and one of the few people that can be reliably trusted. In the same way, the earliest adaptations of Silver the Hedgehog, he's Sonic's number 2 adversary, unless you're playing... Alright, I think you get it. This is a bad retcon, and while we can look back on those titles 10 years in the future and determine if these changes made any sense, it's much harder for the developers and players to deduce something like this in the moment. But this is what we get to do today. And this is what I want to bring to our attention. Nintendo, in the last 3 installments of new Zelda games, has been subtly retconning the entire universe and how all of the characters and worlds fit together. And it's working fantastically. This is the art of the retcon. Nintendo has always taken special care to protect our Hyrulean hero and his world. The Legend of Zelda stories come across like real love letter to the players. It's real, it's honest, and because of that, it's loved and cherished. Even though there have been countless installments into the series, there isn't a single game that stands above the rest as the definitive best of the series. You can prove this by going onto any messaging board and typing the words, "This game is the best Zelda game and you're wrong if you disagree." My point is, you can reliably find someone who likes that one game that you thought was stupid and bad and doesn't belong in the whole series. I, for one, I liked Phantom Hourglass. I thought that was a pretty good game. It definitely didn't get a whole lot of critical reception, but this is my point. As I said in the beginning of the video, Nintendo recently released an updated timeline for the Zelda series. This trumped the previous timeline and is the most blatant example of Nintendo saying that they're retconning something that you'll ever find. But something additional changed between these 2 official timelines. Something not written on either timeline. Something that will only strike the most observant and the most dedicated fans. Something that I'm going to call biome merging. The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time introduced to us one of the most iconic races of the series, the Royal Zora. Before this game, there were Zora, but they looked significantly different than the Royal Zora that we see in Ocarina of Time. They were greenish, they kind of looked like a cross between frogs and lizards, and they were not friendly. The Royal Zora, on the other hand, were blue, they talked to you, they were your allies, and in Majora's Mask, you could even play as one of them. In future games, Royal Zora was kind of the go-to allied race for a lot of games. Now, fast forward to just a few months ago, and you would not have seen a single River Zora in any 3D Zelda game, and likewise, you wouldn't see any Royal Zora in any 2D top-down game. That is, until the newest installment, Echoes of Wisdom. This game really pulled back the curtain as far as possible, and without directly telling us, said, "Hey, so we're changing what you thought about Hyrule. You know how you thought it was all separate? Well, it's not now. They all live together. You just haven't seen them together yet." And this corroborates with something that happened in Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild as well. They made it so that Zora and Rito live in the same game together. Now, before this, there wasn't any mention of Rito and Zora living in the same timeline. There was a brief moment in Wind Waker where there was one Royal Zora as a spirit long past, but that's the only time that Zora appear in a world with Rito as well. There's no abundance of Zora at the same time that there's an abundance of Rito, and likewise, when there's an abundance of Zora, there's no abundance of Rito. It kind of works like a little bit of a scale. Once there's one side that fills up, the other side doesn't exist. But in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, this just goes out the window completely. All of the time that they spent world building this and making these 2 biomes really distinct, they've merged those now. Now there's just one big biome with everybody together. And now that you go back, you think about it, how these games used to work together, well, they still work together. And in fact, it's just like maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I just don't remember it right. Maybe it was always this way. But it wasn't. And we know this for sure because of the existence of Toon Link in Smash Bros. Toon Link wouldn't be a character if there wasn't a separate biome where Toon Link could exist. And likewise, regular Link in the same Smash game, why would we need 2 of them? It would just be like a skin color or something like that. But it's not how it works, right? They have to have separate links because these separate links live in 2 different biomes. Well, now, Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild, they've kind of eliminated the need for Toon Link entirely. Toon Link is now just a memory, a moment in time that we can look back and say that these biomes were once different, and now we can look forward and say that they will now be united together. Now, Zoras and Rito and the River Zoras and the Royal Zoras can live together. Now that this has happened, it's almost hard to remember a time when these races didn't live together. And this is the best way to do a retcon. Nintendo has made it so that when the player looks back at previous installments, they can't quite make out exactly how it was any different from the one that just released. However, once you notice it, you can almost see how Nintendo was kind of making things up as they went along, and it makes one appreciate even more how they managed to fit it all together. Nintendo did a fantastic job with retconning the Zelda universe, and they're one of the only big companies that I still trust with their own IP. I look forward to seeing what adventure Link goes on next, and how it fits into this wonderful world that they've built. Hey, if you like this video, I have one more about how sequels have changed throughout the years. Check it out. This was the Art of the Retcon, and I'll see you next Sunday.